Okay, in this video, I want to talk about castling. And in this example game, this is a game I played with one of my strong students. I actually was losing this game. I played a very dangerous opening, kind of a dubious opening called the King's Gambit. I certainly don't recommend it unless you study it pretty hard. And my opponent, he's up 3 points here. He ended up going up 3 points in the opening. I dropped 3 pawns. So this is the King's Gambit. So you give up a pawn often to get some center control. And I made some mistakes, and he ended up getting an advantage. The thing is, though, his king is still in the center of the board, and my king had been castled. So we're going to talk about castling today. I actually castled to the queen side here. So my king came from e1 to c1, and then the rook jumps to the other side. The king always moves over two spaces, whether he's castling to the king side, which I didn't do, or the queen side. And my opponent did not castle. In this position, my bishop really wasn't doing much, and I was trying to figure out how to get him involved, and I played this move here, which the computer says was absolutely the best possible move I could have found in the position. And part of the reason why is now he has no chance to get his king out of the center of the board. So his king is stuck there, and I'm able to take advantage of this. I slowly just kind of maneuver my pieces, and his king stuck in the center of the board. This knight is hanging. He tries to defend, and I realize that because my rook is controlling this, I've got a bishop coming here, I've got another bishop coming here. I don't even need this rook. So I sacrifice it. And he actually should not capture back. He should probably run here, but he's still going to be in big trouble. He captures, and it's forced checkmate in just a couple moves. So I end up winning this game in just 27 moves, even though, if you look at the material, I'm down 6 points. I was losing basically as far as material is concerned, but the fact that his king was not castled, that's why he lost this game. He lost this game because he never got his king safe. So, center control is big. You want to control the center of the board in the opening. You need to get your knights and bishops into the game. You got to get them developed to affect center control, but you also need to make sure you keep your king safe. And my student did not do that in this game, and it led to almost a miniature. 27 moves is an awfully short chess game, especially when you're up 3 points and suddenly you're lost. Okay, so castling. Again here, so you want to try to control the center of the board. This is kind of a relatively normal opening. This is not, these aren't necessarily the best moves or anything. I actually want to get us to a point where both players can castle. Okay, so these are solid moves for the most part. Again, you do want to watch out for these f2 and f7 are weak points in regards to the king, so it's an easily attacked spot. But yeah, you want to get your knights and bishops involved in controlling the center of the board. So this does make some sense. I'm attacking his pawn here. So a real strong way to respond to an attack like that is to develop a piece, because you do want to get your knights and bishops engaged in that control for the center of the board. So that does make some sense. And yeah, maybe I bring my knight out here, and maybe he brings his knight out. Something like this. And again, this is not necessarily realistic, although in general, these are solid moves that can be made. Something like this. So these bishops are facing off against each other, which, can mess up the pawn structure. But the point here is to get to the point where we can castle. So again, this is perhaps not the most realistic position, although yeah, there's this huge struggle for the center of the board, which is what we normally are looking for in your opening in chess. But you also got to get your king safe. And the reason I went through this way is because actually in this position, both players can castle to either side. So when you castle, it has to be the first move for your king. So your king cannot have moved ever in the game. If you move your king, you can't castle. Even if you move him back to the starting square, no, you cannot castle. But yeah, the king would move over two spaces, and then the rook goes on the other side. We call this castling to the king side because this side of the board is where the king starts. White king always starts on e1, black king always starts on e8. This is called the king side. And black can castle to the queen side. When you castle, you always must move your king over two spaces, and then the rook goes on the other side. Now, normally, if you're playing on a chessboard, you've got to pick the rook up and put it on the other side. But be very careful. You do need to move the king first. If you're playing in an actual tournament game and you touch the rook first, you cannot castle. You'll lose your right to castle. I've actually had where my students have moved their rook and then gone to move their king, and they've been called out on it by another student. As a tournament director, I have to tell them, hey, yeah, you touched your rook first. You're not allowed to castle if you touch your rook. In tournaments, it's touch move. If you touch a piece, you have to move that piece. So yeah, the king has to move first. Do notice that yeah, there ends up being a couple of spaces over towards the corner. So the king is still closer to the center when you castle queenside. So queenside castling is a bit more dangerous. Yeah, kingside castling, the king is just kind of more out of the center of the board, often less likely to be attacked. It's just easier to attack a king when you castle queenside. So most people do castle kingside, unless you have some sort of, if you have some sort of advantage, your piece development is better, you think you have more attacking chances. The nice thing here is the rook then ends up being in the center. And it is good a lot of times to bring your rooks to the center of the board if there's not a file that's open. An open file is a file that has no pawns on it. You might want to bring your rook to an open file rather than the center if that does exist. So yeah, so you can castle either direction. You can never uncastle. Okay, so once you've castled, that's it. You cannot go back and uncastle. You can move your king if you need to, but you cannot move your king before you castle. Okay, let's look at a couple scenarios here and see if you can figure out why white can't castle in these following positions. So again here, you cannot castle if the king has moved. You cannot castle if you've moved the rook that you would castle with. You cannot castle if the king is in check. So if the king is in danger, you have to get the king out of danger by blocking or capturing the piece that's checking the king if you're going to castle later. So the king has to get out of check first without moving, and then perhaps you can castle later. Or if the king would pass through check. So if a square is that the king would move across is controlled by a piece, then you would not be able to castle. So pause your video and think about it. Why can't we castle here? Well, pretty simply, you don't have a rook on the queen side, so there's no queenside castle. Kingside castle, well, the rook is not on its starting square. It should have started on h1 here, so the rook has moved. That is why we cannot castle here. All right, so why can't we castle here? So think about that for a moment. Pause your video if you like. I need to get some annotation tools. Yeah, so we cannot castle here because, well, once again, there's no rook on the queen side of the board, and the queen is controlling f1. So we cannot castle because the king would pass through check is the issue here. The king would pass through check, and you cannot castle if the king would pass through check. Now, if the rook is passing through danger, that doesn't matter. It's if the king is passing through danger. Okay, so, all right, go ahead and pause your video if you want to think about why white cannot castle. It says white cannot castle queen side. So queen side of the board again is the side that the queen starts on. So this is the queen's side over here. So A through D is considered the queen side, and well, the king side is E through H over here. That's the king side of the board. So it says white cannot castle. Whoops. White cannot castle queenside, and by the way, this is the notation. This is how you would write castling queenside. Castling kingside is actually 0-0, like that. But why can't we castle here? Hopefully you paused your video and thought about it. Well, the king has moved here. So the white queen starts on the white color, or light queen starts on light color, dark queen starts on dark color. Yeah, this is the queen side of the board, and the king's sitting over there. The king starts on e1. So the king has moved here. That is why we, whoops, not the rook. Not the rook has moved. The king has moved. That's why we can't castle here. All right, same idea. It says white cannot castle king side this time. And why is that? Pause your video if you want to think about it for a moment. But yeah, the rook is not on his starting square. He's moved. You cannot castle to the king side. Maybe think about why wouldn't we be able to castle to the queen side? So we can't castle to the king side because the rook has moved, right? That's correct, but we can't castle at all in this position. And the reason we can't castle to the queen side, hopefully you've noticed, is because the queen is controlling d1. She's controlling that square, and the king cannot pass through check. So that would be why we cannot castle to the queen side. Not asked by the question, though. All right, and this is the last one here. So why can't we castle here? Is it because the king is moved, the rook is moved, the king is in check, or the king would pass through check? What is the reason here? Pause your video if you want to think about it. But yeah, the king is not on e1, so therefore he has moved. The king is moved, so you cannot castle. Yeah. So yeah, castling is an extremely important maneuver to do in chess. You need to get your king safe. The goal of chess is to checkmate the king. You need to take care of your king while attacking your opponent's king. Do you remember anytime you do castle, you're moving your king 2 spaces over towards the rook. You need to move your king first. This is the only time the king can move 2 spaces. He moves 2 spaces towards the rook, and then the rook comes immediately on the other side of the king. Anyway, that's castling, a very important maneuver that all strong chess players do. The strongest players in the world castle usually within the first 10 moves or so in most games. There are some weird situations where you may not castle. If the queens get traded early and there's a bunch of pieces taken off the board super early, maybe you don't castle in that weird situation. But in general, like 95% or better of chess games, we do castle to get our king safe. All right, now thank you for checking out that video with me. Yeah, please check out my channel if you're interested in more videos about chess. And yeah, I look forward to talking to you, hearing your comments. Okay, or seeing your comments. All right, bye-bye.